When I say, today we're talking about the endoskeletons, likely the first thing that came to your mind is maybe the Easter egg characters in 1 or 2, or the glam rock endos in Security Breach. But oh no, we're going through every single endoskeleton in the entire Five Nights at Freddy's franchise, unless I miss one. But first, what is an endoskeleton? An endoskeleton is the interior framework of an animatronic. Endoskeletons are used in real-life animatronics, well, along with non-animatronics as well, but are also a staple of FNAF. Unlike real-life endoskeletons, which are frail, or at least were back during the Rock-afire Explosion Chuck E. Cheese days, which the original FNAF was based off of, as these animatronics ran off air pressure systems to direct their movements, FNAF animatronics are usually more sturdy and robotic in nature. While only a specific character in some instances, endoskeletons appear in many of the games and in many different designs and models, starting with FNAF 1. Endo 1 is an Easter egg who sometimes appears in Parts and Service, or in the back room. That is, amongst the remains of the other endoskeletons who are already back there. The endoskeleton cannot jump scare you, they just can be spotted on the camera occasionally. Also, plot-wise, the reason the phone guy gives you for the animatronics attacking you is because they think you are an endoskeleton and are trying to put you in a suit. FNAF 2's plot reveals mostly throw a wrench in this theory, though. Speaking of FNAF 2, the endoskeleton returns yet again. Endo 02 sports ears and a thicker frame with rib-like structures along its chest. It's bulkier all over and, especially in this game, bears a resemblance to Withered Foxy. Endo 02 is, like Endo 01, an Easter egg who appears at random times and is nothing more than a momentary distraction, though unlike 1, 2 can appear in 2 locations, in the vents and in the prize corner. That's pretty much their entire role. Endoskeleton pieces return again in FNAF 4, where you can see them in a storage room that the crying child is left locked inside. These ones are much more menacing, resembling skulls. However, to quote a hint Scott dropped after FNAF 4 to reveal the story of FNAF, what is seen in the shadows is easily misunderstood in the mind of a child. Indeedy, in the shadows of the Nightmare mode, we see Nightmare, a nightmarish version of Fredbear, if you couldn't guess from the name. If you turn up the brightness, you can see an endo hiding underneath its dark exterior. Whether this is a hallucination, a literal nightmare, as the hints imply, or as some animatronic wearing an illusion, that has never been confirmed, though this endo does return as a cameo hidden in Help Wanted. FNAF World is when we get our highest diversity concentration of endos ever, both as playable characters and as bosses to fight. On the playable side, we have Endo 01, 02, and the Endo Plush. The Endo Plush being a character who, as far as I'm aware, isn't featured anywhere else, but is likely based off of Plushtrap's Endo. Now, Endo 01 and Endo 02 work as support characters. Both of them have moves that can increase the stats of other players, along with both having a move that summons 3 endoskeletons that pop up in front of the group and fire upon the enemies, and last for a short amount of time. Endo Plush has some stronger moves, such as Neon Wall, and Water Hose 2, a move that knocks out any enemy that's under 50% health. Other than them, on the boss side of things, we have the Mad Endo and the Gold Endo. The Mad Endo is just basically a big endoskeleton that you have to fight midway through the game. The Gold Endo is an optional boss fight that, if you fight them, drops a lot of loot. There's also a shopkeeper named Mendo, who's just kind of a alternative, recolored endoskeleton. Mendo is a shop owner who sells pieces of endoskeletons to increase your defense. That's pretty much his whole deal. Now, up until this point, pretty much the endoskeletons have had small, virtually unimportant roles. Their basic premise just being really that they're the animatronic skeleton, and because of this, they only appear as Easter eggs or side characters or side casts like that. It is in Sister Location when this all changes. Sister Location is the first time an endoskeleton takes the role of a major character, and this character would be none other than Ennard, a walking clown car of animatronic insides. Ennard, a play on the word endo or endoskeleton, and innards, is an amalgam created when all of the animatronics in Circus Baby's band, Circus Baby, Ballora, Funtime Freddy, and Foxy, combined into one form. They then scoop Michael Afton and make him into their suit, a disturbing implication suggested as early as Phone Guy's call in the first game, and go wandering around in the guise of a human before dumping him and moseying along on their way. Until internal fighting leads to Ennard splitting up, with Circus Baby getting kicked from the band and Ennard devolving into Molten Freddy. But before we get too far ahead of ourselves, there is an alternate ending where you confront Ennard head-on in a private room. During this time I'm gonna just keep calling it he, start to use both Baby and even Elizabeth Afton, Michael's deceased younger sister's, voice to try to get himself into the room with him. Though this fails, and after Michael returns home to finish up his soap opera, Ennard comes crawling in, having apparently snapped both legs escaping Afton Robotics. This does beg the question of why Ennard didn't escape Afton Robotics on his own, and there is a line mentioning they've been out before but are always put back. But maybe it was just the sheer desire to spite Michael that got them out of there. Or who knows, maybe he did smuggle them home. There's not too much we know about Ennard character-wise, though his manipulative nature likely spawns directly from Baby, because once driven by Funtime Freddy and becoming Molten Freddy, he sort of succumbs to Freddy's vice of following fake voices and laughing like a maniac. To which we can assume that Ennard's character basically is decided on whichever consciousness is driving him. And yes, Molten Freddy is the next Endo in line. Featured in Pizzeria Simulator, Molten Freddy isn't much of an endoskeleton as he is a pile of metal wires. So let's discuss these wires real quick. While the original endoskeletons were in fact a skeleton, the Afton Robotics animatronics are made of endoskeletons comprised of overlapping wires laid in a muscle-like structure. With Ennard, it almost gives him the impression of a stable body, but Molten Freddy has completely unraveled. We don't see him much in action, but we can assume that he gets around well enough. Unfortunately, Molten Freddy's run is cut tragically short when he is burned in the fire with the rest of the animatronics who have been trapped inside, Michael Afton, and so on. Also, before we continue on, there is also an Easter egg known as Yendo, who sometimes appears in the Funtime Auditorium alongside Funtime Foxy. It's a bear-shaped endoskeleton with yellow eyes. From the name, which is likely a mix of yellow and endo, it's possible this endoskeleton could be for a Golden Freddy adjacent animatronic. But there's no evidence of this or any explanation for where the bear comes from. Just continuing the line of Easter egg endos. Now we'll get on to Help Wanted. Plenty of endoskeletons reappear in Help Wanted, from the initial classic Endo 01 to the Nightmare Endo that I mentioned in the FNAF 4 section. Now, there's so many background cameos of endoskeleton pieces that I don't think I'll be able to cover them all, so I'll mostly focus on the big Endo roles. FNAF 1 and 2 are remade in Help Wanted, and their Endo Easter eggs, Endo 1 and 2, appear in their familiar roles. In the parts and service levels, you get a closer look at Freddy, Bonnie, and Foxy's endoskeletons and their insides as you work on them. Not exactly endoskeleton characters, but a quick peek into how they are built. Apparently, there is an Endo that appears in the Funtime Foxy Blacklight level, and if you walk into him, a glitched Bonnie appears. I couldn't find any videos showing this, but I can verify that there is at least an Endo in the level. In Vent Repair, we witness the second coming of Ennard, who follows us down an elevator shaft full of puzzles, down into the boiler room, and then gets assumedly burned by us. Or does he? In the Blacklight Harder mode, Ennard hops up at the last second and starts climbing into our elevator as it begins to plummet. Upwards. This level alone has single-handedly convinced me that Ennard should have stuck around for at least a few more games. In the Curse of Dreadbear added level, Build-A-Mangle, you build a mangle out of Endos parts. That kind of counts a little bit. That, in fact, pretty much covers Help Wanted. Like I said, there are plenty of hidden cameos around, but none notable enough to mention. The Endo's next return is a big one, and that's in FNAF AR. The Endo is both the easiest animatronic to fight and the easiest to collect, and was released alongside the original batch of animatronics with the release of the game. The Endo does not have any new voice lines and has the most basic of mechanics. It walks around, it fake charges, it real charges, it gets overcharged, it goes down, nothing to it. Endos are also a major part of the workshop mode. You get endoskeletons in the game which you can suit up with collected suits and CPU chips to use and then send against your friends. They can also wander around and bring back rewards. The Endo gets a couple of skins, Flamethrower Endo and the Deep Water Endo. Flamethrower being decked out with said flamethrower, a welding mask, and having his body heated up to glow yellow and orange. Deep Water Endo takes inspiration from the anglerfish, with large dead eyes and with a tangle of vines and possibly coral in its chest. I think these are both very cool skins, and since they're connected with an easy-to-get animatronic, they were probably also on the easier side of collecting, too. The Endos come back again and yet another big way in Security Breach, not just as a cameo, but with a brand new, bigger-than-ever model, the Glamrock Endos. Lurking in the basement, the Glamrock Endos are a formidable threat that Gregory runs into a few times throughout the game. This makes the Glamrock Endos the first Endo that's a real threat. I mean, except FNAF AR Endo, Ennard, and his butted-off alternates. When it comes to basic endoskeleton, this is the first one that's a real threat. The Glamrock Endos react to being in the player's line of sight. When you look at them, they halt in their tracks, but if they leave your sight, they'll start coming right towards you. Non-activated Glamrock Endos will stand there slumped over until disturbed by either a timing cue or by passing by them, in which case they'll wake up and begin to follow you. If you hide, the Endos will begin to patrol, and you can even hear them moving around in the upper rooms. But they aren't able to check hiding spots. So if you get into a situation where you're cornered by a bunch of them and are right beside a hiding spot, you can actually hide inside of a hiding spot and let them wander around until there's a better scenario for you to climb back out and sneak past. The Glamrock Endos appear in the basement hallway maze, the one that's decorated with the moon merch, in the daycare basement section, and in Bonnie Bowl after getting the Monty Mystery Mix. Story-wise, their main contribution is that they are the base for the Glamrocks, specifically Freddy and Monty. Any Glamrock Endo can be given a personality chip and fitted in a suit and become a new character, as told by Vanessa when she threatens to disassemble and replace Freddy. Now, the Glamrock Endos have red glowing eyes. Considering that they shouldn't be moving around at all, this has led to the theory that they are under the control of something. A likely theory since the staff bot's eyes also glow red when they're under the control of Vanny. Other animatronics with red glowing eyes, well, other than Vanny herself, would be Moon, whose eyes are blue when his lighting is altered, Monty, who you can see red dots in the back of his eyes, and the Blob, who we will get back to in a minute. There is a notable mission involving an endoskeleton that was cut from the game. It involves a frozen Glamrock Endo holding a camera that Gregory warms up by going into the boiler room and adjusting the temperature. It's unclear if this camera is the Fazcam or not, but it could be. It's also possible this mission takes place in the walk-in freezer, which is also nearby the location of the cutscene of Vanny peeking around a corner. There are still animations for this frozen Endo walking around, but they're pretty much the same as a normal Glamrock Endos. But that's not the only oddities with these endoskeletons. In the teaser office leading up to release, there was a clattering walking noise that sounded very much like the sun and moon. This noise is only used in a crawling Glamrock Endo on the side of the wall near the basement in the very beginning of the game. It's pretty odd considering that it was such a staple of the lead-up, and then it's just a very easy-to-miss Easter egg. Though noises in the trailers have always been odd, Burntrap's lines are always framed with ticking, and in two separate locations we hear a weird jump scare noise that is not used in the final game. Here it is. Curiouser and curiouser. To brush up on the Blob, who might be a mound of endo wires and thus technically an endoskeleton lump, like Molten Freddy, here it is. It also does have an endoskeleton proper stuck into the bottom of it. With that finished, now let's get on to the books, and oh boy, this is going to be a long one, folks. Are you ready? Let's go. Starting with the Silver Eye trilogies, there's two endoskeletons of note along with cameos of them here and there, sort of like the games. One of which is a Foxy endoskeleton in Henry's garage, which Charlie, the main character, was afraid of as a child, this leading to her fear in her later confrontation with Foxy. However, in the fourth closet, it was retconned that this Foxy endoskeleton was actually the fourth version of Charlie, or Circus Baby. I think these two pictures speak for themselves. Another important endoskeleton would be the robot that Henry built to end his life. In the graphic novels, it's depicted as looking like Endo 2 and carrying what has to be a steel short sword, but in the actual books, it's described as an endoskeleton with a mask on it, likely either taking inspiration from the puppet, Ennard, or possibly leading on to inspire the Stitch Wraiths. Speaking of which, let's talk about the Stitch Wraith. The Stitch Wraith is an endoskeleton character and a major set of characters through the epilogues of the Fazbear Frights series. I did a whole video on these two, but basically the Stitch Wraith is an endoskeleton haunted by two boys. With a mask mounted on its face and a battery to its chest, both souls were introduced into it and pretty much had to work together to control it. Again, I made a whole video talking about them, so I won't go off here. That level of salt must be contained. Fazbear Frights features endos here or there, but the only story I can think of that features an endoskeleton in a major role is The Breaking Wheel, and Julius's endoskeleton, or exoskeleton. The Breaking Wheel is about some teens in a robotic class being tasked with building science projects. Class bully Julius builds an exoskeleton to make himself stronger and faster, but the only flaw being that it keeps reacting to the remote of another project built by a kid named Pickle. Yes, there is a kid named Pickle, and you know what? At least it's not another Fritz. Alas, Julius's ego gets the best of him, and when he starts picking on the main character, Reed, and after a series of events, he is left locked inside of the exoskeleton and abandoned at the school. Reed goes home with his friends, and once they get to the house, Pickle's annoying little brother is fooling around with the remote for his school project, and Reed starts to worry that maybe it's still connected with Julius's exoskeleton. Pickle, in his calculated opinion, assures him that it probably can't, and stops him from going back to the school to check. So, as the kid's playing with the remote, Reed starts hearing something climbing around the house. Suddenly, Pickle and the others are like, "We're going out to get some Coke, you stay and tape the hockey game," and bail. That's when Julius drops in, all mangled up in the exoskeleton suit, limbs broken, body torn asunder, and he begins to hunt Reed around the house before getting him in a chokehold. Or something close to it. The others return home and Pickle's little brother screws around and breaks the remote, leaving it ambiguous to if Reed was saved or destroyed alongside Julius's exoskeleton. The Breaking Wheel is like all of Fazbear Fright stories, a mixed bag. The premise of the exoskeleton, of the broken body, of that whole theme is really creepy. Seeing the little robot getting screwed around with and realizing that Julius is going through all of that is a very effective way to show body horror without really having to show it. But it's broken up with stuff that just doesn't make much sense, like, why does everyone just leave in the middle of a thunderstorm to go get soda? Why does Pickle let his little brother utterly destroy his science project he worked so hard on? Why does the dumb jock Julius build a better robot than the dumb average Joe Reed? Well, I've got a theory. I think the mystery is easily solved if the truth is that Pickle is just like an evil mastermind who planned this whole thing. In fact, I choose to believe this. Pickle gets ticked off because Julius bullies him too. He hears the altercation between Reed and Julius and decides to use it to his advantage. So, when they get home, he lets his little brother utterly decimate the remote, even turning the joint control off, and stops Reed from going back to save Julius. Then, when Julius shows up, Genius Pickle hears what's going on and bolts, making sure to take his family and leave Reed behind as the scapegoat. Then, when they return, he lets his brother finish the job, making it so none of this gets back to him. Makes sense. But I digress. Now we get into Tales from the Pizzaplex. The Glamrock Endos appear in a little cameo once, but don't really do anything except walk by. The major endoskeleton character of the series is the main villain of the epilogues, an endoskeleton known as the Mimic, who can shift its body to fit any suit. The Mimic is basically a human killing machine, a gore factory with no known personality except a thirst for blood, shown almost always butchering the nearest human and moseying off. As of right now, we're about halfway through the Tales of the Pizzaplex series, and some of the details of Mimic's backstory have leaked, so I will be addressing those, but I have a sneaking suspicion that the Mimic is going to have some sort of late-stage big reveal, kind of like Eleanor did, so this information here is tentatively timed. Probably in the next couple of months, the information that we know on this character will probably be much more broad than I'm mentioning just right now. But right now, we're going to discuss the leaked Mimic story that reveals the backstory of the endoskeleton. So spoilers, and stop me if you've heard this before. So, Mimic was created by one of the original men involved with Freddy's, this time the suit maker who suddenly became mechanically skilled enough to build an endoskeleton to fit any suit, which started mimicking his kid, which it played with. When his kid unexpectedly dies, as one does in the FNAF universe, he takes his anger out on the Mimic because it reminds him of his loss. Then he runs off to be insane for a few decades until returning in a later story. The Mimic, meanwhile, absorbs this rage, or likely mimics his rage, and starts killing indiscriminately. It just is a slightly changed reworking of past stories, down to the, in this case, dead or sometimes missing wife and mother. You know, the reason so many mothers were deceased in Disney movies originally was because Walt Disney himself dealt with the very real grief of losing his mother in an extremely traumatic way. I'm not sure what's going on here. The Mimic itself is just Eleanor with even less personality, though at least it doesn't look like Baby this time. It just runs around and kills everyone in especially gory ways. Little kids love reading about people getting ripped in half, having their throat ripped out, and having limbs torn off. My issue being that it's not like a build-up situation. It's like, imagine 4 people standing in a room, and then suddenly Bender from Futurama runs in and kills 2 of them, and then the other 2 run down separate hallways, and then Bender kills them too. It's that formulaic. Yeah, I've heard theories that Mimic is Burntrap, and you know what? It would make sense to why Burntrap has absolutely no character or presence. But I wonder how Vanny stopped it from just running into the next room and bodying her at any time. Boy, this would be an awful time to end the video. But it's starting to look like that's what's going to be happening, because this is kind of the end of our endoskeleton journey. Now, the endoskeletons are kind of a weird bunch. They started out as nothing more than Easter eggs and background characters, basically a staple of the background and of the back rooms, only to become bigger threats as the series progressed. While Endo 01 and 2 are pretty basic, they're classics, you know? We'll probably see them again in future compilations. Never to have a huge story relevance, but likely not going anywhere. The Glamrock Endos are a really great step to turning the docile Endos into a viable threat. My only critique being that it does feel like some of the sections they're in weren't made for them, and instead they were just stuck there as some form of padding. The tight basement hallway is a good place for them, as you have to manage your vision to get by, but dropping them into the daycare basement and Bonnie Bowl, both places where you can just sprint by, was likely just a decision to put something there. Though in the long run, I suppose Glamrock Endos work better than staff bots or nothing at all. I might be biased, but I definitely think the turning point for the Endos and the internal MVP would be Ennard, who was the first hunk of inner workings to take over as the final threat of their game. Ennard also stands out as the one endoskeleton who separates themselves enough that it almost feels like cheating listing them as one. Kudos to Ennard for showing us that these little guys could be a big problem if they wanted to be. Do I think an endoskeleton will ever get as big of a role as Ennard ever again? Sure, in fact, there might have been one cut from Security Breach, but who knows. Either way, we'll be sure to see them again. Perhaps we'll even get a new batch of endoskeleton models after the Pizzaplex phase of FNAF is finally over. Only time will tell. For now, we are at the end of this journey. Thank you for watching.